Member Alvin Brown, and Member Todd Inman. Together, we comprise the Board of Inquiry for this investigative hearing, the notice for which was published in the Federal Register on July 25th, 2024. Mr. Brazy, our hearing officer, please start us off with a safety briefing.
Thank you, Chair Hamandi. If you have not already done so, please silence your electronic devices. The address of our boardroom is 429 LaFont Plaza Southwest, Washington, D.C. There are approximately 150 attendees here today. Restrooms are located in the lobby, to the left as you are exiting the boardroom. In the event of an emergency, we have designated NTSB personnel to certain roles. Please stand as I call your name and remain standing until the conclusion of the safety briefing. Tim LeBaron will call 911. Jen Adler will meet emergency personnel outside of the front doors. There is a defibrillator in the lobby, just outside the doors in front of me. Elias Contanis will retrieve it if needed. Sabrina Woods is trained and willing to use the device. Lorenda Ward is trained and willing to perform CPR. Fire extinguishers are located near all exits, 2 behind the dais, down the stairs, 2 at the back of the boardroom where you entered, and 1 by security. Deidre Estes will run and retrieve one if needed. There's also a first aid kit in Conference Room A. This is the room closest to the security area. The kit is on the counter in a blue pouch, and Dana Schultz will retrieve it if needed. Next slide, please. If there is a need to evacuate for any reason, please follow Rochelle McAllister, who will lead you to the exit route and will be wearing a yellow vest. Please walk quickly, don't run, to the rear of the auditorium. Go out the doors, proceed to the lobby, through the lobby, past security. Go up the stairs and exit straight ahead through the glass doors to the outside. Once outside, turn left and follow the sidewalk to the end of the street, which is our rally point. Please do not return to the boardroom until instructed to do so. Next slide. The wheelchair accessible exit instructions are as follows. Kelly Hessler will lead you to the exit route. She will also be wearing a yellow vest. Go out the doors, proceed through the lobby, past security, immediately turn left and exit through the door, which will take you into the parking garage. To exit the garage, turn right and proceed up the ramp. Once outside, turn left and follow the sidewalk to the end of the street, which is our rally point. Should the unthinkable occur and there is an active shooter, the FBI recommends you run, hide, or fight in that order. Running improves your chances of survival. Leave your belongings behind and don't stop until you've reached a safe location. Keep your empty hands raised and clearly visible when exiting the building. Follow all instructions from the police. If there is no safe escape route, hide. Silence your cell phone. Do not call 911 until it is safe. Fight only as a last resort. Slide. If there's a need to shelter in place due to an emergency, we will remain in this auditorium. We are below ground and in a secure location. If such a situation arises, we will make an announcement. Staff and security will guide anybody in the lobby into this room. We will then secure the doors until the danger passes. Next slide. Lastly, I'd like to remind everyone that each of us has a vital role to play in any emergency. If you see something concerning or suspicious, say something to one of our NTSB staff or security staff right away. If you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to talk to any member of the NTSB staff. Chair Hamandi, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Brazy. If anyone here is here or watching remotely and you are not familiar with who the National Transportation Safety Board is, the NTSB is an independent federal agency that's charged by Congress with investigating every civil aviation accident in the United States and significant events in all modes of transportation. We issue an official determination regarding probable cause. As appropriate, we will issue safety recommendations to prevent future accidents. We also investigate certain incidents that present significant safety issues, and we strive to accurately identify and report all relevant facts, conditions, and circumstances relating to each accident or incident we investigate. When necessary, we hold investigative hearings. An investigative hearing allows the NTSB to gather sworn testimony from witnesses on issues identified by the investigative team for a specific event or systemic safety issue. This hearing is an important part of our ongoing investigation of the accident that occurred on January 5th, 2024 in Portland, Oregon. Investigative hearings are fact-finding proceedings. The purpose is to receive testimony and evidence which may be of aid in determining the cause of an accident. At about 5:14 p.m. Pacific Time, a Boeing 737 MAX 9 operating as Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 returned to Portland International Airport after the left mid-exit door plug departed the airplane in flight, leading to a rapid decompression. The airplane landed on runway 28 left at Portland International Airport without further incident, and all occupants, 2 flight crew members, 4 cabin crew members, and 171 passengers deplaned at the gate. 7 passengers and 1 flight attendant received minor physical injuries. I say physical injuries because this was quite traumatic for the crew and the passengers, and injuries we can't see, which we often don't talk about, can have profound, lasting impacts on lives and livelihoods. So on behalf of the entire agency, we are so sorry for all that you experienced during this very traumatic event. For those in the room, Elias Quintanas from our Transportation Disaster Assistance Division is here to provide support to anyone who may need it, and I believe he's at the back of the, oh, Elias is right there. Can you raise your hand? Stand up. Great, thank you. This hearing will consist of 4 panels. Overview of Boeing 737 MAX 9 manufacturing and inspections. Events surrounding the opening and closing of the mid-exit door plug. Safety management systems and quality management systems, and Federal Aviation Administration oversight. These topics were identified at a pre-hearing conference with the technical panel, parties to the hearing, and the Board of Inquiry, which we hosted last week on August 1st, 2024. As a reminder, if anyone has information they would like to share with the board, whether you're here or not here, or the investigative team, please do not hesitate to reach out to us at witness@ntsb.gov. Again, witness@ntsb.gov at any time. You may also email me at chair@ntsb.gov, and I will share that information with the investigative team for follow-up. I'd now like to introduce the NTSB staff we have in the front row. They consist of the technical panel. Mr. Doug Brazy is our hearing officer. Mr. John Lovell, our investigator in charge for this investigation. Mr. Picholo Cruz, lead aerospace engineer. Mr. Nils Johnson, aviation accident investigator, maintenance. And Dr. Sabrina Woods, senior human performance investigator. In the back row, we have Ms. Leani Benitez Cardona, who will operate the audio visuals. We have Ms. Sierra Giuliano, who will operate the timer. And we have Mr. Tim LeBaron, Director of the Office of Aviation Safety. Behind me is Mr. Eric Johnson, who will provide legal support. Now, let's turn to the parties to the hearing. Thank you all for your cooperation with our investigation to date. Federal regulations guide how we designate parties to an NTSB investigation and to an NTSB investigative hearing. They are those persons, governmental agencies, and organizations whose special knowledge will contribute to the development of pertinent evidence. The parties to this hearing have been designated in accordance with these regulations and selected for their technical expertise in their respective fields. As I call the name of each party, I ask the designated spokesperson to identify themselves and then introduce others at their table. We're going to go today in alphabetical order by organization. So we'll start with Airline Pilots Association.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Captain Steve Jangelis. I'm the Aviation Safety Chair for the Airline Pilots Association. With me today is our party coordinator, Captain Mark Henniger from Alaska Airlines. Boxrucker is here also from Alaska Airlines, as well as Captain Dennis Vorpal. Along with me is ALPA staff, Chris Heck, and Captain Jeff Perrin, our Accident Investigation Board Chair, is also with us today.
Thank you, Captain. Alaska Airlines.
Good morning. My name is Max Tidwell, Vice President of Safety with Alaska Airlines. I have with me today Mr. Ben Allen, Peter Geltz, John Seitz, who is our Director of Flight Safety, and Jason Lai, who is our Maintenance and Engineering Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Tidwell. Association of Flight Attendants.
Good morning. I'm Seth Heipel. I serve as the AFA, Association of Flight Attendants, Air Safety, Health, and Security Chair at Alaska Airlines, and as the AFA Party Coordinator for the accident. With me are Chris Wachowski, Director of the Air Safety, Health, and Security Department at AFA, Dinker Modicum, AFA's OSHA Specialist, Rhonda Ruderman, Chair of AFA's Aircraft Technical and SAE Committees, and Steve Vincent, AFA Investigator for the accident.
Thank you, Mr. Heipel. And we will go with Federal Aviation Administration.
Good morning, Chair. David Gerlach as the spokesperson for the agency. I have to my right Matt Rigsby, who is the FAA IIC, and then Ms. Hillary Hines from Aircraft CERT, Brian Hilgrow, Brian Knapp, our witnesses today, and Chris Stevenson, our General Counsel's Office.
Thank you, Mr. Gerlach. And International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers.
Morning, Chair. My name is John Holden. I'm president of Machinist District 751. With me, I have AMTI John Petrozelli. We have our General Counsel, Jonathan Shapiro, Business Rep Lloyd Catlin, and our witness. And we also have Business Rep Grievance Coordinator Daniel Swank.
Thank you very much. And Spirit AeroSystems.
We have Heather Meyer, myself, which is Vice President of Quality at Spirit AeroSystems. We have Mark Dombroff, counsel, and then we have witnesses Bill Brown, Greg Brown, and Mike Roney with us sitting at the table.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the parties. As a reminder, only party spokesperson may question the witnesses on behalf of their organization. As we announced on June 27th, Boeing remains a party to the investigation, but not to this hearing. As such, the company is not permitted to question the witnesses during these proceedings. However, I am very pleased that Boeing has joined us today. Thank you for your continued work with us on this investigation. We have a shared goal, collective duty, to ensure improvements to safety. Your assistance in developing the most complete and factual record for this investigation is critical. And again, thank you for being here. And that goes for all the parties. On behalf of the NTSB, I'd like to thank you for your assistance with our investigation thus far. Parties are essential in helping us develop the facts around an investigation. With that said, as a reminder, all of your organizations have signed a party agreement that lays out the rules of conduct, which remain in effect throughout the course of this investigation. This includes, but is not limited to, the provisions of 49 Code of Federal Regulations, Sections 831.11 and 831.13, which respectively specify certain criteria for participation in NTSB investigations and limitations on the dissemination of investigation information. I'm now going to ask each party spokesperson, and when the Boeing witnesses come up, them to indicate whether you understand and remain committed to upholding the NTSB party agreement in its entirety. Please answer yes or no when I call your name. By organization. ALPA?
Yes.
Alaska?
Yes, ma'am.
AFA?
Yes.
FAA?
Yes.
IAM?
Yes.
Spirit?
Yes.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the board, I'd like to thank the many witnesses testifying at this hearing in support of aviation safety. Witnesses will be questioned under oath. They will remain under oath until the conclusion of the hearing. We ask that all witnesses, and this is important, all witnesses be present for the entire hearing, both days, unless you have coordinated in advance with the hearing officer, because you may be recalled later for further questioning. The witnesses have been selected because of their ability to provide the best available information on the issues pertinent to this investigation. The witness list was reviewed by the parties to the hearing last week at the pre-hearing conference. In the interest of time, we will not describe the witnesses' credentials. Instead, we have pre-qualified each witness by documenting their qualifications in writing. You may review each witness's biographical information in the public docket, which opened to the public this morning. I'd now like to provide a general overview of the hearing and appropriate conduct for the proceedings. You may wish to refer to the hearing agenda for more detail. We expect each day to run from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. With that said, we can and will go longer if needed. I will remind everyone that before I came to the NTSB, I worked on the Hill, where we had 17 to 20-hour markups. We will not leave until all questions are asked. We will break for a 1-hour lunch at about 1:45 p.m. each day, and we will have breaks throughout. The first break will occur after the technical panel asks questions before the parties begin to ask their questions. However, if you need a break, pass me a note. I'm not that formal. Throw a sticky up here. So, today's panel 1 will run from about 10 a.m. to lunch. The topic is overview of Boeing 737 MAX 9 manufacturing and inspections. Following lunch, panel 2 will run till about, well, whenever. We'll cover the events surrounding the opening and closing of the mid-exit door plug. Tomorrow, we'll begin with panel 3, safety management systems and quality management systems, which will take us to the lunch break. And following lunch, we'll have panel 4 on FAA oversight. We'll follow the same process for all panels. Mr. Brazy will reintroduce the members of the technical panel and swear in the witnesses. And then witnesses will be questioned first by the technical panel, second by the parties, third by the Board of Inquiry. Parties will have designated time during each panel to question the witnesses. Each party will keep their questions to 5 minutes or less. We have a timer to help you stay on track. We do anticipate being able to accommodate more than one round of questions per panel. I will make all rulings on the admissibility of exhibits, appropriateness of questions, and pertinence of proffered testimony. If a party spokesperson objects to any question asked during the hearing or wishes to discuss admissibility of an exhibit or the pertinence of proffered testimony, please raise your hand and wait to be recognized by me. A word about conduct. This is not an adversarial hearing. This doesn't mean tough questions won't be asked. They should be asked. This is an investigation. However, the board does not permit cross-examination of witnesses in the legal sense, nor do we assign fault or blame for an accident or incident. As a result, we will not permit questions related to fault, outside litigation, or legal liability in general. Questions related to legal liability or fault are not relevant to the fact-finding purposes of an investigative hearing or our statutory mission. We're here to improve safety. Before I invite the hearing officer to introduce the exhibits, I'd like to acknowledge the many people on Team NTSB who've made this hearing possible. Office of the Chief Financial Officer, Office of the Chief Information Officer, Office of the General Counsel, Office of the Managing Director, Office of Aviation Safety, Office of Research and Engineering, Office of Safety, Recommendations and Communications, and of course the offices of members Graham, Chapman, Brown, and Inman, as well as my team. I'd also like to give a shout out to our summer interns, Sierra Giuliano, which again is in the back, and Natasha Mahadio, who have assisted us in the preparation of this hearing. Our other fabulous interns are Jacob Wells, Caden Nuri, Jeremy Braden Edwards, and Matthew Chin. Thank you all for your work throughout the summer. Next, the hearing officer will describe the exhibits. Mr. Brazy.
Thank you, Chair Hamady. Exhibits for this hearing include reports produced by NTSB investigative staff, videos, and other documents submitted by the technical panel members, witnesses, and parties to support the testimony and questions you will hear over the next 2 days. The exhibits for the hearing are in the docket. The docket number is SA Sierra Alpha 543. The NTSB is authorized by statute to disclose information to carry out its mission, but we protect confidentiality and proprietary information to the greatest extent possible. As such, the exhibits contain redactions. These are the result of negotiations between parties and the NTSB regarding the disclosure of information claimed to be personally identifiable, security sensitive, or proprietary in nature. Though redacted, the exhibits contain sufficient information so that members of the public can refer to them during the hearing and throughout the NTSB investigation. The exhibits entered into the record and any presentations, along with other records of the investigation, become part of the NTSB public docket and are available via the NTSB website, ntsb.gov. The public docket opened this morning. Party spokespersons and witnesses have been provided electronic copies of the public docket containing the exhibits identified above. The docket is located on the investigation page, which you can access in one of two ways. You can visit ntsb.gov, or if you've joined us in person, you can scan the QR code on the back of the hearing agenda. On the investigation page, you will find the link to the public docket on the right-hand side, just above the map. A transcript of the testimony taken during the hearing will be prepared and entered into the docket as soon as possible. In addition, Mr. Johnson will keep a list of any documents that are identified during the hearing which are not currently exhibits in the NTSB public docket. As a reminder, if a party to the hearing has a new exhibit to propose in accordance with 49 CFR 845.9, it will not be admitted unless the chair determines that good cause has been shown. The documents will be submitted after the hearing and entered into the public docket. While the parties do not participate in the analysis of our evidence, you can submit written comments for our consideration. This is where parties can state their views for the record, such as the potential conclusions that may be drawn. We strongly encourage parties to submit written comments which are beneficial to our analysis. Our regulations provide two separate opportunities to do this. First, you may submit comments on the hearing per 49 CFR 845.13. Following an investigative hearing, any party to the hearing may submit proposed findings to be drawn from the testimony and exhibits, and a proposed probable cause and proposed safety recommendations designed to prevent future accidents or incidents. The proposals shall be submitted within the time specified by the investigative hearing officer at the close of the hearing and shall be made part of the public docket. Parties to the investigative hearing shall serve copies of their proposals to all other parties to the hearing. Such comments are due to me, the hearing officer, within 30 days after the close of the hearing, and that's Friday, September 6, 2024. We ask that any submissions be sent to us electronically. The second opportunity to submit comments is through the traditional party submission process outlined in 49 CFR 831.14. Any party to the investigation designated under 831.11 may submit to the NTSB written proposed findings to be drawn from the evidence produced during the course of the investigation, a proposed probable cause, and or proposed safety recommendations designed to prevent future accidents. A due date for this submission will be provided at a later time. You may avail yourselves of one, both, or neither of these opportunities. If you do send comments at any point, they will be included in the public docket. As mentioned, we will consider party comments during the analysis phase of the investigation and our preparation of the final report. Chair Hamady, that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brazy. I'll now ask Investigator in Charge John Lovell to provide an overview of the accident. Floor is yours.
Good morning. As you heard in the chair's opening remarks, on January 5th, 2024, about 17:14 Pacific Standard Time, Alaska Airlines Flight 1282, a Boeing 737-9 MAX, returned to Portland International Airport, Portland, Oregon, after the left mid-exit door, MED plug, departed the airplane, leading to a rapid decompression. Shortly after takeoff, the captain said that while climbing through about 16,000 feet, there was a loud bang. Both flight crew said they immediately donned their oxygen masks. They added that the flight deck door had blown open due to the rapid decompression in the cabin. It was very noisy and difficult to communicate among themselves and with the cabin crew. The flight crew immediately contacted air traffic control, executed emergency procedures, landed on runway 28 left, and taxied to the gate without further incident. After the rapid decompression, meanwhile, in the cabin, the emergency oxygen mask deployed, and the cabin crew performed their safety functions to assist passengers, to include secured the cockpit door that had blown open, donned oxygen masks so that they could then assist passengers, attempted to communicate to the flight crew, but it was so loud that they could not hear a response, assessed the condition of the cabin, issued instructions, and did appropriate individual checks on passengers, such as an unaccompanied minor. And they prepared the cabin for the emergency landing. The left MED plug was recovered from a neighborhood backyard. The plug and the associated hardware are shown on this slide. The accident airplane was equipped with an MED plug, which is a customer option. The MED plug is not meant to be opened during operation. It is only operated during inspections. The investigation found that the MED plug left the Boeing Renton manufacturing plant and was delivered to Alaska Airlines without the 4 bolts having been installed that were required to secure it to the fuselage. The left MED plug was installed and pre-rigged on the fuselage on July 18th, 2023 at Spirit AeroSystems. You will hear more about this process in the first panel that talks about manufacturing. The close and verify pre-rig task was accomplished on July 28th, 2023 per production order. The fuselage was shipped by train to the Boeing Renton facility on August 31st, 2023. Evidence showed that the required 4 retaining bolts were installed. At that time, it was inspected and no non-conformance reports or NCRs were issued against the MED plug. If a discrepancy is noted with the plug, an NCR is generated and the repair or rework is performed. Boeing does not open the MED plug unless a discrepancy is found. The Boeing production process typically has 9 factory flow day positions in the 737-9 final assembly process, 6 of which can affect the MED plug. Records show that on September 1st, 2023, an NCR was created noting 5 damaged rivets on the edge frame forward of the left MED plug. On this slide, the yellow circles show the location of the damaged rivets. To rework the damaged rivets, access required opening the left MED plug as shown on the slide now. The rivets were replaced per non-conformance order and was completed on September 19th, 2023 by contract Spirit AeroSystems personnel at the Boeing Renton facility. The MED plug was then closed and the airplane was delivered to Alaska Airlines. As stated earlier, post-accident evidence showed that the retaining bolts were not installed. The blue circles show the location where the bolts should have been installed. Insulation is covering the fourth location. More details about the opening and closing of the left MED plug will be discussed in panel number 2. This slide shows that between September 18th, 2023 at 5:16 a.m. and September 19th, 2023 at 10:56 p.m., the MED plug was opened, the rivet rework was performed, and the MED plug was closed. This information is the culmination of NTSB's review of Boeing's Shipside Action Tracker, or SAT, of text messages, photographs, interviews, installation plans, non-conformance records, and non-conformance orders. Panel 3 will discuss the quality management system and voluntary safety management system, and panel 4 will touch on FAA oversight so that by the end of this investigative hearing, there should be a better understanding of how the 4 retaining bolts escaped established processes. NTSB staff was notified of the accident on the night it occurred, and the NTSB GO team launched the following day to Portland, Oregon to investigate. The listed people on this slide assisted in the conduct of and are supporting this ongoing investigation. The chair of the NTSB traveled with the investigative team and acted as the agency's spokesperson. Next slide. The NTSB invited qualified persons to act as parties to participate in the investigation. These entities included Airline Pilots Association, Alaska Airlines, the Association of Flight Attendants, Boeing Commercial Airplanes, the Federal Aviation Administration, the International Association of Machinists Union, and Spirit AeroSystems. As the chair mentioned, Boeing is a party to the investigation, but is not a party to this investigative hearing. Madam Chair, this concludes my opening statement, and I now turn it over to you as chair of the Board of Inquiry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Level. We'll now begin with the first panel. Will the hearing officer please introduce once again the members of the technical panel, bring up the witnesses, and then swear in the witnesses?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Will our witnesses please take their seats at the table across from the room, please? Chair Hamidi, the first panel is Overview of the Boeing 737 MAX 9 Manufacturing and Inspection. The panel will address Boeing 737 MAX 9 production in general, the training of mechanics, turnover and retention, mechanic experience, pairing and assigning of tasks, the process of documenting nonconformance, description of the shipside action tracker system and its intended use, description of the common manufacturing execution system and its intended use, and the process for documenting the removal of previously installed parts or components. The NTSB panel, starting to my right, is composed of Mr. John Lovell, the investigator in charge, Mr. Picholo Cruz, lead aerospace engineer, Mr. Nils Johnson, aviation accident investigator for maintenance, and Dr. Sabrina Woods, senior human performance investigators. Witnesses for panel 1 are composed of the following individuals. From my left, nearest the board members, Ms. Elizabeth Lund, Chair of Quality Operations Council and Senior Vice President for Quality at Boeing Commercial Airplanes. Mr. Doug Ackerman, Vice President of Supplier Quality, Boeing Commercial Airplanes. Mr. Terry George, Senior Vice President and General Manager for Boeing Programs at Spirit AeroSystems. Mr. Scott Graybon, Senior Director, 737 and P-8 Quality at Spirit AeroSystems. And Mr. Lloyd Catlin, Business Representative at the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. I now ask that the witnesses please stand to be sworn in. Please raise your right hand and please answer by saying, I do. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated. As a reminder to the witnesses, you will remain under oath until the conclusion of the hearing. We ask that you answer questions factually and avoid analysis. Finally, please push the microphone button to talk and then push it again when finished. Chair Hamidi, these witnesses have been pre-qualified and their respective experience and qualifications appear in the docket as exhibits. I would now like to turn the questioning over to Mr. Cruz.
Before you begin, Mr. Cruz, two things. One, because I asked the parties and now that Boeing is up here, I'm going to ask Ms. Lund on behalf of Boeing to indicate whether Boeing understands and remains committed to upholding the NTSB party agreement in its entirety. Please answer yes or no.
Yes.
Thank you. And for a word of caution for everybody here, Board of Inquiry, technical panel, parties, witnesses, there are a number of names of personnel. Some are not redacted, some are redacted in the docket. Do not use you can use positions, you can use what work crew, not names of those personnel who have been redacted. Thank you so much. Mr. Brazy.
Mr. Cruz.
Good morning. Mr. George, what are your roles and responsibilities as the Spirit AeroSystems Senior Vice President, General Manager of Boeing Programs?
Can I ask the staff to pull the microphones closer, and can you repeat that question one more time, Mr. Cruz?
Sure. Mr. George, what are your roles and responsibilities as the Spirit AeroSystems Senior Vice President, General Manager of Boeing Systems?
I'm the leader for Wichita and Tulsa, mainly the Boeing programs for all of the operations, which includes fabrication, assembly, the support groups, and also tooling and facilities.
Thank you. Similarly, Mr. Graybon, what are your roles and responsibilities as the Spirit AeroSystems Senior Director, 737 P-8 Quality?
Good morning. I'm responsible for the oversight of the quality organization, covering the 737 as well as the P-8 to ensure that we are performing to meet the compliance requirements.
Thank you. Mr. George, does Spirit AeroSystems hold a production certificate?
We do not.
Okay. Could you
Can I ask the witnesses to also speak up and pull the microphone? Thank you.
Could you generally describe what components Spirit AeroSystem manufactures for the Boeing company and describe the Spirit AeroSystems fuselage manufacturing process in the Wichita plant?
So in the Wichita plant, we have all of the Boeing forward sections. We also have the 737, the entire fuselage. Most of the Boeing propulsion end items, so the strut nacelles. In Tulsa, we have mainly the wing components for the Boeing aircraft.
What is the company's organization or reporting structure like, starting from Spirit production personnel?
Well, like I said earlier, I'm the senior
That's
vice
great.
president, so I have 9 or 10 either vice presidents or directors that report to me. Most of them in Wichita, but also one in Tulsa. And again, it's divided into, for example, the 737 fuselage has a leader, the propulsion package has a leader, the 737 thrust reverser has a leader, my fabrication area has one, the tooling and facilities group has a separate leader, the same in Tulsa. That's generally how we're organized.
Madam Chair, I believe we have a video that might, and Mr. Cruz, a video that might explain the production better. If we could call that up, I would request.
Okay, good
Mr.
morning.
Graybon.
Yeah, so let's pause here, please, on this slide. This video is a time-lapse video of the build of the 737 fuselage at Spirit AeroSystems. So I'm going to ask that you pause on the first 2 slides. There's some technical data that may help everybody in the room understand what you're going to see through the time-lapse video. It takes approximately 3 minutes for the entire video. Okay? Please proceed to the first slide. Okay, let's pause. So this is the Spirit responsibility. All areas in blue, like Terry just mentioned, are what Spirit is responsible for. This video is going to concentrate on the fuselage section, which is the tubular section running diagonally on the screen. The fuselage is made up of 6 independent sections that will all become one piece, one part number at the very end. It will also comprise approximately 70% of the total structure of the 737. Okay, next slide. Okay, let's pause here for just a second. So this is the Spirit work statement. This is specific to a single fuselage. There's approximately 18,000 parts per fuselage, 200,000 fasteners per fuselage. At the current rates, that equates to approximately 6.2 million fasteners per month and 74 million fasteners per year. There's also 288 suppliers. That's both domestic and international. It's important to note that based on the size and scope of this build, Spirit is an AS 9100 certified facility, meaning that our quality management system conforms to the international standards for aerospace manufacturing. We do that through the use of approximately 250 quality inspectors who perform both in-process as well as final inspections. And it's also important to note that both Boeing and the FAA historically and currently have had an on-site presence at Spirit to help oversee quality as well as regulatory oversight. Okay, so let's proceed with the video, and this is it'll move pretty quickly. So the video takes place entirely in Wichita, Kansas. This is our global logistics center where detailed parts are received from all around the world, as well as Spirit fabrication. Spirit also receives raw material. This raw material, such as this aluminum, large aluminum plates, will be made into skins on the 737. Spirit processes at our own facility. Following processing, those detailed parts will be brought to the floor. They'll be made into assemblies, and they'll feed the sections that were described on the first slide. These are our floor beams. Floor beams are made for each section of the fuselage. Each section, the floor beams will be integrated into each section before the sections are moved into being integrated into a final fuselage. Spirit also uses technology such as what we call SPIFFy, which is both a touch and a scanning technology used to measure fastener head heights. So this is also our auto fastening machinery, similar to SPIFFy, where 50% of the through skin fasteners are done through our auto fastening process. Following auto fastening, the majority of drilling and filling is done by hand. Upon completion of each section, the sections will be lifted up by crane that you see here, brought over to our integration area where they'll be lowered onto positioning pogos. The positioning pogos then laser align first the lower sections, and then the forward and aft sections are brought together. Spirit also uses industrial engineering type technology that ensures that the proper person is at the proper place at the proper time throughout the build in the fuselage. Once the laps and joins are completed, you now have all sections have become a single fuselage. Once complete, the fuselage will be lifted out of integration and brought over to our seal bay area by crane. In seal bay, the interior and exterior seal will be applied. From there, it'll go to our camo facility. In camo, it'll be primed, painted, and corrosion inhibitor applied. Spirit also has a facility in Subang, Malaysia. In Subang, we do detailed parts as well as assemblies. This is where the mid-exit door plug is built, packaged, and shipped to the Wichita facility. Once received in Wichita, the door will be installed and pre-rigged, as noted earlier in the statements. Once all the structure is complete on a 737 fuselage, the unit is placed on a rail car and prepped to ship. At this point, Boeing, Spirit delivers the fuselage to Boeing. Boeing then pulls the fuselage approximately 2,000 miles over a course of about 12, on average 12 days, to its Renton facility, the 737 plant in Renton, Washington, at which point the empty fuselage will be stuffed with electrical, hydraulics, interiors, and be integrated into a 737 aircraft.
Thank you for that presentation. How many manufacturing lines are there for the 737 fuselage in Wichita?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes. How many manufacturing lines are there for the 737 fuselages in Wichita?
Currently, we have 10 integration tools. That's the best way I can answer that question. And what Scott just showed you, when we were loading each of the sections into integration tools with the help of the AIT manipulators, there's 10 of those.
And how long does it take to manufacture a 737 fuselage in Wichita?
Again, difficult question. If we think about starting with the purchase of raw material, it's 12 months. So we purchase raw material, we fabricate parts, we do sub-assemblies, we also assemble the sections and then into integration. So generally, it's about a 12-month time period.
What Spirit documents are used to manufacture the fuselage?
In order to manufacture the fuselage, Spirit utilizes what we call IPs, which are instructions. Each section is built up via all the instructions, make the detailed parts and the assemblies. I'm not sure if, does that answer your question?
Yeah, is there like a hierarchy of documents that you have as far as the production orders or anything like that?
Well, we follow our IPs, our production orders, as well as our procedures and policies. We also have BACs, which are Boeing documents that have very specific requirements that we must meet.
Does Spirit own the documents or does Boeing?
Spirit owns our work orders. Boeing owns certain specifications.
Okay. And how often are the manufacturing documents audited for clarity and ease of use?
Well, Spirit's under a continual audit process. We audit based on either certain findings throughout other audits or annually in certain areas. It really does depend on if there's been any findings and how often. If we audit, let's say, annually, if we've had findings in certain areas, we'll perform additional audits.
Could you please describe the Spirit process should there be a discrepancy during the manufacture of a fuselage? How is this discrepancy tracked and managed?
If a discrepancy is found, we really have two means to document. One is called a pickup, what we refer to as a pickup. A pickup is a non-conformance that does not require an engineering disposition to be brought back to engineering requirements. The second means that Spirit utilizes is an NC, a non-conformance. What that is we'll refer to as a tag. The defect will be detailed on the tag, location, type of defect, part numbers, reference to drawing numbers. Engineering will provide a disposition of how to correct the defect. It will not be brought back to engineering, original engineering, but it'll be brought back to another acceptable means for engineering. Engineering has the final say. Once the engineering disposition is created, the operations team will perform the rework. Quality team will re-inspect and accept.
So in discussions with Spirit personnel, the investigative team heard the term defect and nonconformity in manufacturing. Can you describe the difference?
A nonconformance is it's an item that does not meet the engineering requirements. The term defect, it's difficult with the word defect. Everything is a nonconformance in quality. A defect can be a nonconformance, but just because there is a defect, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a nonconformance. And I think that's an important note. You can see something that is ugly, but it doesn't mean it's a nonconformance.
Those Spirit production documents show that there are inspection points in the manufacturing records. How and who determines these inspection points?
Inspection points are determined by quality, manufacturing, or engineering, typically, depending on how the build is made. You can have an inspection point added by having additional findings later on throughout the build as we mature, just to add an inspection point to add an extra layer of oversight.
Is there a difference between Spirit manufacturing personnel inspections and Spirit quality personnel inspections? If so, what are the differences?
Spirit manufacturing doesn't perform inspections, with the quality team performs inspections. Manufacturing can identify an area to be inspected, but only a qualified Spirit inspector can actually perform the inspection.
Is there any certification requirements to be the quality inspector?
Quality inspectors are a specific job code which is different than a manufacturing person. Spirit quality inspectors also go through training in order to become inspectors.
So should Spirit Systems decide there needs to be a change in the manufacturing process, are any changes coordinated with Boeing? And how does Spirit communicate this to the FAA?
I would say we have updates to our manufacturing plan continuously as a part of continuous improvement. Generally not coordinated with Boeing, but there are times where there is a need for coordination with Boeing. It is not coordinated to the FAA from Spirit.
So with those changes, how are the implemented changes communicated to the manufacturing personnel?
But we have job paper or installation plans. That's what tells the manufacturing community how to perform the work. If there's a change, we have a term of a red flag. So on that installation plan, it will flag it that there's a change to give the mechanic a heads up.
So where are all your production records kept? Is it in a system of some sort?
Yeah, production records are kept in our MES system, manufacturing execution system.
And what is your typical Spirit record retention policy for these records?
I'll have to come back to you with exactly how long we hold on to how long. I mean, the records are for the lifetime of the airplane. I just don't know how long we keep them in Wichita. We then put them in long-term storage. I just don't know what that time frame is.
Thank you. Dr. Woods.
Thank you. I believe this question is for Mr. George. By all means, pass it off if that's incorrect. At the time of the accident, what was your average production rate for the year for a 737 fuselage?
At that time, it was 38 airplanes a month.
And currently, what is your production rate?
Production rate is 31 airplanes a month.
What goes into dictating how your production rate fluctuates?
Generally, it's Boeing controls the master schedule, if you will. They're going to determine number of deliveries, et cetera. Our rate is going to be based off of their rate. There is some buffer inventory between us, so it doesn't always have to be exact, but it's very similar.
When you change that rate, what sort of change management process does Spirit employ to ensure that you maintain the same level of conformity and safety with each change?
We go through a rate readiness process, and basically what you're doing, you're looking at all resources, so human resources, tooling, machines, space. From there, we're doing our calculations of what additions need to be made to be able to go from a lower rate to a higher rate. Obviously, hiring personnel, adding the equipment, et cetera. Did that answer it?
It does. Thank you. So, given the last 5 years or so, has Spirit AeroSystems ever decided against a rate change of any sort? For instance, trying to go from a lower rate to a higher rate, or conversely?
You know, that's a good question. So with COVID and the MAX grounding between ourselves and Boeing, there were times where we had some very great conversations about should we or should we not go to a particular rate increase. So they have the authority. So we are obviously going to fall in line on whatever that rate increase is. But because of the situation in the last 5 years, we have had some good conversations relative to should we or should we not.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Morning. Two things about my group of questions. My group of questions are for Spirit, so I don't care what Mr. George, Mr. Brown, who answers. Also, the perspective is at the September 2023 timeframe. If something's changed between September 23 and now, please describe in effect in September.
Nils, we can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Did you guys catch that, or should I repeat?
I think we got most of it.
Okay. Do out-of-sequence production tasks ever occur on the 737 production line?
So when we think about, excuse me, out of sequence is relative to Spirit, as opposed to Spirit and Boeing. So we'll just start right there. We do have out of sequence activity. I would just, for example, the last 7 months, obviously we try to minimize it. And there's a management decision associated with how much is enough. I would tell you the last 7 months, for example, we've been at our lowest levels ever in terms of out of sequence or travel work.
Okay. Do you have a formal process for dealing with out-of-sequence production tasks?
We do not, meaning that, and I've seen this, again, I'm 41 years with Boeing and Spirit. So I've seen it done a couple of different ways where you would actually create travel IPs. But we do not do that, and we haven't done that since we became Spirit 19 years ago.
In January of 2023, the investigative team witnessed at Spirit an MED plug being installed on a fuselage. The technician was observed using a lubricant not called out by the engineering documentation to assist in closing the plug and to protect the seals from damage. Did Spirit authorize the use of a lubricant contrary to the requirements of the engineering documentation?
We, again, we have had some good conversations with the Boeing company because both companies rig these doors. This particular med door with the end gate and the bulb seal and the friction associated with it, you have to have a lubricant of some type. Otherwise, you're going to tear the seal. And the conversations through the years have been, what's the appropriate lubrication? So everything from Vaseline to baby powder to liquid soap, etc. And so, to answer your question, it was left up to the mechanic at that time to determine what the appropriate lubrication should be. Since that time, we have created Engineering Green Line that now calls out the Dawn soap as the preferred lubricant.
Okay, so the corrective action was formal documentation in the engineering documentation to call out the right lubricant?
It was. It's through a green line. It exists today. It actually officially went into effect, I think, sometime in May.
What is the process Spirit AeroSystems uses to remove a previously installed installation?
Spirit has a removal process. It's a documentation. Anytime you have a completed installation, the paperwork is closed, so Spirit performs a removal. A removal documents anything that needs to be taken apart so that the formal documentation exists to put it back together.
Madam Chair, Niels, I think just one correction. I think you said January 2023 and you meant 2024, correct?
I meant September, what it was as of September 2023. At the time that 8789 was being fabricated.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Has Spirit had any issues with undocumented removals?
Spirit has, throughout our very complex build, there has been times where we have had undocumented removals. Those are corrected via corrective actions inside of our factory, as well as disciplinary actions if needed.
Okay, I was going to ask what the corrective actions were that you put in place to prevent it from reoccurring, and you're saying changes to the process and formal corrective action.
Yeah, so we have to be careful with if someone let's say misses a removal process. The first thing we have to learn is, did they miss a removal process because they just didn't understand the process? At which point they need to be retrained and re-educated on how the removal process works. Otherwise, we will look at disciplinary measures for avoiding a process.
If Spirit finds an issue or an escape related to manufacturing, what is the process for corrective action on the production line? And the second question is, how is Boeing notified when this occurs?
So can you repeat the first part of that just to make sure I'm clear on the answer?
Yep. If Spirit finds an issue or an escapement related to the manufacturing, what is the process for corrective action on the production line? I'll stop there.
Okay, so if there's an escape from Spirit AeroSystems and it's identified by Spirit, we have a notice of escapement process. That process, the first thing we do is look for scope and bound. What was the defect? What was the escape, I should say? When did it occur? What aircraft are affected? What line units are affected? So we look for scope and bound first. We'll also then formally perform line checks throughout our factory, meaning we will look at everything that's in our production system and perform an inspection to see if there is any of those defects found in our production system. At that point, the NOE will be written with the scope and bound for anything that is not what is no longer in Spirit's possession. And then the corrective action will be, we do a root cause corrective as to why the defect occurred. Is it a manufacturing issue? Is it a planning? Is it an engineering issue? Whatever that is, and that'll then be corrected.
And what is the process used to notify Boeing if this happens?
The NOE process. So once the defect is determined to have escaped the Spirit factory, and we give them a notice of investigation now, which as a preliminary to the notice of escapement, it's more of a heads up. So if Boeing then has an aircraft that, let's say, it's ready to deliver, they'll know that there's potential for this defect to occur. Then the true official notification is the notice of escapement, which is the formal document that is then released to Boeing indicating what units are affected, what exactly is affected, and working on the root cause corrective action.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cruz?
Thank you. Ms. Lund, what are your roles and responsibilities as the Chair of Quality Operational Council and the Senior VP of Boeing Commercial Airplanes?
Thank you. I have 3 primary roles. Number 1, as you mentioned, is the chair of the Quality Operations Council, which is a role in which I represent quality across the Boeing company at the executive level, so representing all business units at our executive council. I also, as you mentioned, am the leader of quality for Boeing commercial airplanes, and in that role, I lead a team of approximately 7,400 quality professionals across the BCA organization. And then lastly, I am responsible for the development and execution of our comprehensive safety and quality plan, which we have put in place post the Alaska accident.
Thank you. Similarly, Mr. Ackerman, what are your roles and responsibilities as the Vice President and Supplier Quality Boeing Commercial Airplanes?
Good morning. I have 2 responsibilities that cover the parts that we bring into our factories. Part of it is for our external supply chain, where I have a team that is responsible for working with our external suppliers to oversee their quality management system and ensure we have conforming parts coming in. The other half is for our internal fabrication organization, where we build parts internally that come into our factories, and I have responsibility for the quality organization in fabrication.
Thank you. Ms. Lund, does Boeing hold a production certificate?
Yes, we do. We hold PC 700, which allows us to produce commercial aircraft.
And what is the company's organization reporting structure like, starting from the production personnel and the manufacturing process?
The reporting structure is that for the personnel in the manufacturing process, there are mechanics and inspectors. The mechanics roll up through our manufacturing organization and report to, in many cases, the programs, the 737 program, 677, 787, or the fabrication division. The inspectors are located on a program, work with the program, but report directly to me as an independent organization of quality.
Can you please explain the Boeing production process of building an airplane?
I can, and I'd like to pull up 2 exhibits if I could pull up
Sure.
Boeing Exhibit 1.
Yes.
All right, to start with an overview to answer the question, we have 3 production lines to build our 737 in final assembly. There are 10 flow days. Our first 3, flow day 1, 2, and 3, you will see those only listed once. They are housed together. There are 3 positions in flow day 1, 3 positions in flow day 2, 3 positions in flow day 3 in a tool located there. From that point, you will see flow day 4 through 10, we split into 3 lines. And for a point of clarity, I will comment that at the time of September 2023, we were running only 2 lines to build our 737s, the west line and the central line. We were using the east line to pull airplanes in to do rework, but not in the baseline build of the aircraft. If you could pull up Exhibit 2, please, just a little bit more detail of how we build the aircraft. Oh, that was it. Thank you. If we can go back. Thank you so much. In flow day 1 through 3, this is the location where we load the fuselage into that tool. You can see the tool I was referring to there in flow day 1 through 3. This is where, again, in September of 2023, we would do an initial inspection of the fuselage. That has since changed, but we would do an initial inspection of that fuselage, and we start to do things like install the blankets, ensure the airplane is ready, and start to do the basic work on the fuselage. When you move to flow day 4, that is really our join position. That is where we put the wings on the airplane, the horizontal stabilizer, vertical stabilizer, and the gear. That's where it really becomes an airplane, not a fuselage. Then we continue through the process. In flow day 5, we start to load the back of the airplane, interior components. We start to do some rigging. We make sure our fuel tanks are good to go. Flow day 6, we turn power on the airplane. That is where we turn it into a live airplane. We start to begin some of our testing. We really start to build out the interior. Flow day 7 is really where we start to do our functional testing throughout the airplane. If I may, Mike, could I ask you to just move that chair out of the way so I can see that screen? Thank you. Thank you. Flow day 7, we start to do our baseline cabin testing and our flight control testing. That lasts for the next few flow days. 7, 8, and 9, we start to test the airplane, make sure our systems are working, and we really finish out the interior build as we get near the end. By flow day 9, we hang our engines. We make sure everything is ready to go. 2 points I will comment on in this flow that I think are relevant. When the fuselage is in the tool in flow day 1 through 3, that's where we do our initial verification of the rig for this mid-exit door plug on the airplanes that have the plug. And then at the end of the line on flow day 9, we do our final fit and fair rig of that plug as well. When the airplane gets to flow day 10, we finish up the work and we get it ready to move outside from the factory.
Thank you. What was the production rate of the 737 fuselage or airplane prior to the accident?
We had approved ourselves to build at a baseline rate of 38 aircraft per month, but we were producing at a rate lower than that, upper 20s to low 30s.
And after the accident?
We are still approved to produce at a maximum rate of 38, but we dropped our rate considerably lower to the single digits, and we are now working our way back up to the 38 airplanes per month, but we are still in the 20s at this point.
Thank you. Dr. Wood.
Ms. Lundy, you just gave us an overview of shortly before the Alaska Airlines accident and then after, but in the last 5 years, how has your production rate for the 737 line fluctuated?
Prior to COVID and prior to the Lion Air and Ethiopian MAX accidents, we were producing at a rate on the 737 line of 52 airplanes per month. After the grounding of the airplane, we slowed that down virtually to 0. And it has been at a lower rate than that since. Coming out of COVID, when the market came back, We were returned to service on the MAX. We started to increase that rate again steadily. And as was stated a moment ago, we had been approved to reach 38 airplanes per month, but had not produced 38 airplanes in a given month prior to the MAX accident or to date.
Would you please describe for us what sort of change management process does Boeing enact to ensure the same level of conformity and safety which each incremental changes?
And is that specifically with regard to rate?
With regard to rate production.
Thank you. Yes, we have a rate readiness process. The rate readiness process is run by the airplane program who's building the product. It starts usually more than a year in advance of any given rate increase. It, as my colleague Mr. George referred to, we do many of the things that he talked about at Spirit, but it is a comprehensive list across the value stream of what needs to be done to increase rate. We ask the questions on staffing, we ask the questions on capital equipment, tooling, engineering resources, and we have a section at Boeing dedicated to the supply chain where we go out to our suppliers. We ensure, as Mr. George described, that they too are capable and ready of going up to rate. We have at least monthly reviews in this process, starting about 2 to 3 years ago with the implementation of our safety management system. We also began to run a safety risk management assessment for every rate increase so that we could look for hazards, we could understand the risks to the system. That is all part of this exercise, and it culminates in a capstone event. I will also comment that as we go through these monthly reviews, culminating in the capstone, we also include the FAA in those reviews. They are welcome to join us, and in my history, the last few years, do attend, at least virtually, these capstone events and these meetings, where we ensure that we are ready across the board prior to approving or authorizing that rate increase. One other point that was brought up earlier is, since the accident, as a part of our ongoing dialogue with the FAA and our comprehensive quality and safety plan, we have established a set of 6 key performance indicators, or KPIs, that we are using to roll up and indicate a healthy factory. We have set control limits per these KPIs as a part of our safety management system. And we watch these control limits, and our agreement with the FAA is going forward. These 6 KPIs and our performance to those control limits will also be an added part of this rate readiness process.
And then, similar to the question that I asked Spirit, since COVID, when your demand did increase, have you ever decided against a rate increase? And if so, what were the considerations for that?
We have. And in fact, over the last 2 or 3 years, we have decided against them much more than we have decided for them. We delayed the rate 31 and 38 rates on the 737 multiple times. The considerations and the primary reasons that we delayed were twofold. Number one was supply chain readiness, the feedback we got from the supply chain, are they ready? And number 2 was the staffing and training of our own employees and being ready there as well.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz.
Thank you. Ms. Lund, what are the manufacturing documents used by Boeing to build an airplane?
There is a set of documents that we use similar to what was described, but certainly it starts with an installation plan. The installation plan is housed in our authoritative system of record, which we call CMIS. The Common Manufacturing Execution System, I believe Spirit referenced it as just MES. We are CMES, but it is our common system of record. That is where our installation plans are housed. They reference a set of drawings. They reference BPIs, which are the processes we use to manufacture under, and specifications as well. which give engineering guidance. And then there is a set of documents that we use, like nonconformance records, as were mentioned earlier, when there is a nonconforming condition that needs to be documented as well.
Can you please describe the Boeing production document hierarchy?
Our document hierarchy is authoritative documentation, which are those documents to which our employees work to. Those are those housed in CMIS. They are the installation plan, the drawing, the documents that we must be able to pull up to meet the Code of Federal Regulations as we build product. From a quality management system, we have our quality documentation, which is developed to ensure that we also comply with all of the CFRs there. The hierarchy there really starts with the CFRs, our quality manual, and then our policies, pros, BPIs, and process guides as you work down that hierarchy.
The Boeing production documents show that there are inspection points in the manufacturing records. How and who determines these inspection points?
The inspection points are decided similarly to as just was described earlier by engineering, by our planning organization, by our manufacturing or quality teams, as the case may be. But we have an abundance of processes. We have a process that lays out the fundamental guidance for how that happens, and we follow that guidance as well.
All right, similar to the question that I asked Spirit, what is the difference between the inspection accomplished by a Boeing manufacturing personnel versus a Boeing quality inspector?
The inspector role at Boeing, like at Spirit, are those who do an inspection. When employees do their work, they place a stamp. The stamp, the authoritative media, the stamp, as I like to call it, is the document that an employee places that says, I've done my work. Manufacturing mechanics typically stamp their work, stating that they did it in compliance with the requirements when they build it. An inspector stamps their work, stating that they have inspected it.
Is there training or certification needed in both cases?
There are certifications required for both mechanics and inspectors for certain activities. But as was described, there are different job skill codes, and different job skill codes perform different functions. An inspector is a different skill code than a mechanic. They are trained in those skills. We certainly recently have done a great deal of enhancement to that training as well, but we train them in those skills. And for certifications for specific jobs or activities, they are provided those certifications when required as well.
Okay. And how often does Boeing review its processes and documentation, and in particular its BPIs, to ensure coherence and clarity?
We have a process document that ensures that we review every BPI no longer than every 5 years. There are some that we do every 3 years, and certainly we do them more frequently if there are suggestions that there's something missing, findings, concerns that come up within Boeing or that come up from an audit, either internal or FAA or whatever it may be. We adjust more frequently, but every BPI will be reviewed no longer than every 5 years.
In each of the sections of the BPI, there's a specific to roles affected to that BPI. What is Boeing's expectation when it lists these roles?
Our expectation is that for any BPI, that the employees whose roles are affected will be following the requirements of that BPI specifically. It's a summary of the people in their roles who would need to go to those BPIs, become familiar with those BPIs, and ensure they are following them.
Can each of these roles flag an issue in the production process if it was necessary?
Each of these roles absolutely could flag an issue in the production process, and people beyond just those roles can also flag an issue if they see something wrong in the production system.
Can you please describe the process for identifying a BPI that needs to be revised? The revision process, and how are these audited? And obviously, you already said there are set schedules to when they're being revised, but
When we find that a BPI needs to be revised for whatever reason, there's a BPI owner. That BPI owner is responsible for the content of that BPI. We propose the revisions. We send it out to a group of employees, depending on what the BPI is. Sometimes we have a workshop. Sometimes there will be a team that is formed to work on it. Sometimes an individual can make the changes, but it's routed for comments. We also now have a approval panel within the quality organization that if there are significant changes to that BPI, it comes to the leadership team to also review that BPI. And then in many cases, the contents of these BPIs are actually approved by the FAA. So after Boeing is comfortable with what we would like to propose, we then send it to the FAA for their review and approval as well. And after all approvals are granted, it goes into effect.
so basically you say that you do solicit feedback from manufacturing personnel when the BPIs need to be revised. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, Mr. Catlin, can you please, before I ask you a follow-up question to Ms. Lund, can you please tell us what your role is or responsibilities for as an IAM business representative?
I'm a business representative in Everett, Washington for the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. We represent the members who are on the floor, who are building the airplane, inspecting the airplane. Often, usually to our collective bargaining agreement, but we're often engaged in conversations about things that are happening on the floor as well.
Would you care to comment on Ms. Lund's answer with regards to soliciting feedback from manufacturing personnel with regards to BPI revisions?
Yeah, there is a process. When you get into the system that stores all the BPI's pros and policies, there is a group of people who do perform writing reviews on each change to each command media document. But these are not people that are on the floor. They are people that are selected from manufacturing, from quality engineering. These are not people who are down working on the airplane, building the products, being forced to or being required to follow the processes that are defined in the command media document.
Ms. Lund, how are enhancements to the process made, and how is it filtered down to the production personnel?
Enhancements to the process are made through the revision process that I think I just described. If you have another question, I'm happy to answer it. And it's filtered down. We have a weekly summary at this point that is flowed out to employees, letting them know what's changed during the week. I will comment that enhancing that process is one of the areas that we are working on as part of our improvement plan, as we've tried to look very broadly at areas that need improvement, things we've heard from our employees that need improvement. That is an area that needs improvement, and we are working on ways to improve that and collecting feedback from our employees about ways that would be more effective to communicate those changes.
When a discrepancy or defect is found in manufacturing, how is it recorded and tracked, Ms. Lund?
When a discrepancy is found, it is recorded on a non-conformance record. There are several times, for the sake of simplifying, but generally capturing it, there are two kinds. There is a non-conformance record, which does not require a disposition, as Mr. George described, as Mr. Graybon described. where a part can be brought to its drawing configuration. We sometimes call that a pickup. You may hear that word here. Those terms are sometimes used interchangeably. And then there is a disposition required, NCR, where the part cannot be brought back to its original configuration per drawing, at which point we go to engineering. We'll get a disposition on that part to ensure that the steps that we take to repair it are conforming, compliant, and safe per engineering definition.
Mr. Catlin, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, no, she's correct. We have multiple different types of nonconformance. We've got the lowest level nonconformance, which is a general pickup, which you can return the airplane to condition without an engineering disposition. And then there is the engineering disposition tag that requires engineering to give us a rework instruction on how to return the airplane to a condition. It's never going to be returned to a per drawing condition, but it is a disposition that allows us to continue building the airplane out. It's in the non-conformance management arena.
Ms. Lund, how are out-of-sequence production tasks handled? Is there a specific procedure or process to ensure the production steps aren't missed?
There are a few different ways, but in general, when a job record, when an installation plan is fired, which means it is due, it's come up on our SEMA system. It's a work order is fired for us to build the aircraft. When that is not complete, that stays with the aircraft record. That paperwork stays open, and as we proceed through the build, we ensure that all paperwork has been accounted for. In terms of out-of-sequence work, I want to hit a couple of items there. We have a BPI for traveled work, for which it primarily describes the requirements for traveling work once you leave the factory and you were to go to the ramp. We certainly operate by that BPI and have traditionally. Traditionally in our factory, we have also had what we call a precedence network, or a precedence network of critical jobs, which we watch, and we make sure that this precedent network, that the critical job prior to another job is complete prior to starting to work on that job. And we use that precedent network to also help us manage out-of-sequence work. Lastly, I will state, since the accident, we are significantly changing how we manage traveled work. And so that is what I would call pre-2024. Since the accident, as a part of our improvement activity, we are implementing a process where we are using safety risk assessments through our safety management system to assess work when it travels out of position, to ensure that we have a plan to work it, that it can be worked from a product safety and a personal safety standpoint safely. We identify how many positions in the factory floor it could move before it could create a safety issue or cover up work or increase out of sequence work. We do that, and then we manage to that. And again, that is just an implementation, but we are having good results from that so far.
Thank you. You mentioned that all the production records are kept in CMIS. What is Boeing's record retention policy for all these records?
Some records are required to be kept for life of airplane. Other records are to be required to be kept for, I believe it's 1 calendar year plus 10 years, so slightly more than 10 years. There are record requirements, and we abide by all of those depending on the various pieces of records.
Thank you. Johnson.
All right, my questions again go back to November of 2023, so please use that in response. Ms. Lund, what is a shipside tracker?
Shipside Action Tracker, sometimes also referred to as SAT. So if you hear that, that's the acronym SAT that we use for Shipside Action Tracker. The SAT system is fundamentally a communication tool. Next to areas of the airplane, we have what we call a Line Side Support Center, or an LSCC. There are cross-functional representatives who sit next to the airplane. Their job is to assist the folks building the airplane and inspecting the airplane, the managers, the mechanics, the inspectors, the fulfillment team, when they need help. they use the SAT in order to help communicate. So if a mechanic were to need something, he could go to the LSCC and put it in SAT, and it communicates to different functions. If they need a part, if they need engineering support, if they need supplier support, it is a communication tool used to let people know when the floor needs help or needs something.
As a follow-up, who initiates the SAT?
A SAT can be requested by anyone on the floor. Typically, it's someone in the line side support center who writes the SAT.
Who is able to update the SAT?
I believe it's typically, again, the people in the line side support center or those who are working in the SAT system.
Per Boeing procedures, is the shipside action tracker considered an official production record for the airplane? Please explain.
A SAT is a communication tool. It is not what we call the authoritative system. SAT does not authorize an employee to work on an aircraft. SAT, as I mentioned, requests help. It lets people know if we need them to come to the airplane. It lets them know what's going on. It allows us to elevate issues so management can get visibility, can come and help when appropriate or reprioritize work. It does not authorize work on the airplane. So in that way, it is not an authoritative system. That is done through CMIS.
Switching gears, could you please explain the mid position, the different configurations of a door that are possible on a 737-9 MAX?
Yes, where there's the mid-exit door plug, the two configurations. You can have a working door in which the door is installed. It works just like a door that you see on an aircraft with a handle, and it can be open and closed and is intended to do that on a regular basis. Or if an airline does not want that door, they can have a plug, the structural mid-exit door plug. So on the fuselage side, the cutout, for lack of a better word, the design, the opening for the door will remain in the fuselage. The plug acts as a structural element to close that. So when you look at it from the inside of the aircraft, you'll see nothing there. It's not intended to open, so the seat rows and the interior stowage bins and things can continue right through that. If it's a door, you obviously have to have an opening for people to exit, for that door to be opened, etc. So you could have a structural plug or you could have a working door.
Is the MED plug considered primary structure?
I will only pause on the word primary. It is considered a structural element of the aircraft.
And what does it mean to be a structural element to the airplane?
A structural element of the aircraft means that it is intended to carry structural loads. It is intended to operate as a piece of structure, not as a moving component. But it is intended to be a part of that structure of the fuselage.
Why did Boeing introduce the MED plug option on the 737-9 MAX?
I was not on the program at the time, so I will start by saying it was originally designed and implemented on the 737 NG. That design was carried over to the MAX, but it was introduced on the NG, I believe, around the 2009 timeframe. I believe it was introduced because some of our customers wanted to carry enough passengers that we needed another exit door to meet the requirements. You have to have so many exit doors, such a distance apart in order to meet the evacuation requirements of the FARs. We had customers who wanted to carry more passengers. There was another door that was needed. I believe that was the original purpose of that door. And then there were other customers who came back that did not want that door. So the design solution was keeping the baseline fuselage design similar and then allowing a customer to either have a working door or a plug, depending on the configuration they were choosing.
How is traveled work defined at Boeing?
Traveled work is defined as work that does not get completed in the position in which it was originally intended to do. So if we fire a work order for a job to get completed in flow day 3, and it doesn't get completed in flow day 3 and remains open, that would be considered traveled work, which had traveled to flow day 4.
Can you describe how the rate of travel work has fluctuated over the last decade on the 737 production line?
Traveled work historically, through my experience with Boeing, has gone up and down periodically through the years, and that is something that I've seen repeatedly through my history. The 737 data represents that as well. There are times when traveled work will go up somewhat, and there are other times when it comes down to a very low level, again, very much as Mr. George described it for Spirit.
Could you please describe to us the BPI 1581 removal process?
BPI 1581 is our Boeing process instruction guide that talks about the need to, when the need comes up to remove parts from an airplane, a job which had been previously completed, a part that is installed and stamped off on an airplane needs to be removed for whatever reason or condition. BPI 1581 is the documentation that gives the processes and the requirements in order to remove that part or assembly.
Is this BPI used, or process used across all Boeing production facilities?
It is. Boeing commercial airplanes, I can speak for, yes.
What is the formal training given to manufacturing personnel is allowed to write removals? And again, remember, this is September of 23.
Thank you. In September of 23, the primary training that would have been given initially would have been the on-the-job training for an employee who comes into a role, would be trained on the job when they needed to do that work. And then to supplement that, particularly as it relates to removals, when an issue is seen or something is happening, we will also issue quality alerts. And there had been several quality alerts related to BPI 1581, which would supplement an employee's knowledge or a reminder of that BPI.
Okay. Back in September, was there any recurrent training for personnel who wrote removals?
There is training for BPI 1581. There is an initial training for BPI 1581 that people needed to take. As of September of 2023, the best of my knowledge, there was not recurrent training. There is now.
What is your overall assessment of BPI 1581?
At the risk of giving an opinion and not a factual statement, but I think it's fairly factual, I would say it is detailed. There was a lot of data. And it is complex. As a part of our initiative to simplify much of our command media, BPI 1581 with removals has its very own element of our comprehensive plan. It's a sub-swim lane all its own, because we know we really do need to simplify that BPI.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Catlin, what is the IAM's role in the aircraft manufacturing process at Renton?
It's our members who do the manufacturing and the quality inspections on the airplane from the beginning to end.
How many IAM workers are there in the Puget Sound area? for Renton?
In Renton alone, I think we're at about 11,000. Throughout the IAM and Puget Sound, we're at about 33,000 members.
How many IAM members are FAA airframe and or power plant certified?
I do not have that number.
Do you know if there are certain job groups that require an FAA certification, A&P, to be in that group?
There used to be. Our AMTs, aircraft maintenance technicians, inspectors used to, but that requirement went away several years ago.
Okay. What does the IAM do to help new members be successful in the aircraft manufacturing process at Boeing?
Well, currently we are in the process of starting our Machinist Institute, where we will be providing some pre-employment training. We refer to it as red light, green light training. But at this point in time, we do have one center open down in the Seattle area. The training of employees per the BCA Quality Manual, Section 7.1.2, is the responsibility of the Boeing company.
How does the IAM promote safety to its members at Boeing?
Well, we have through our joint programs, we have several different processes that we have. We've implemented the SHEER process that allows employees to, working with Boeing, allows them to implement safety issues, concerns that get elevated up through management. We have Article 16 in our collective bargaining agreement. We also have entered into the tri-party agreement with the Boeing company, which is part of the speak up process. And when our members have concerns about safety or quality on the airplane, they can file a speak up report, which goes to the team, gets evaluated by regulatory quality systems oversight, then goes to our members on the tri-party agreement, has visibility with the FAA as well.
Have you ever, or what do you know about the SAT system at Boeing?
That system is a system that I've used several times, many times throughout my career at the Boeing company. It's a communication tool. Depends on what the issue is. As a quality inspector, I often ran into planning errors on installation plans. Some of them would require manufacturing engineering. Some of them would require quality assurance planning. I could write a SAT to get ME engaged in addressing the planning error on the IP. Quality assurance planning used a different process, but if manufacturing needs a part, they would write a SAT. It's literally a communication tool. It has no authority to change the configuration of the aircraft.
Is it an effective tool?
To get the help needed, absolutely.
What type of training do IAM personnel receive regarding the use of BPIs in the production process?
Very little. In our initial training, there is some discussion about it, but there's no official training to how to access the system, which is referred to as 1 PPPM. That's where all of our command media documents are stored. Very little training on anything about the BPIs. There's not a lot of training. You will find in the IPs, there will be references to a BPI, but back before 2017, we had something called required reading. And every Friday, we would get a notification in our email saying that there has been a change to a BPI, a policy, or a pro that would affect our organization. And then we would have a requirement to go in, review those changes, and then we would have to acknowledge that we have reviewed them. 2017, that stopped. It became recommended reading, and then that kind of went away. And now we're down to, in the north plant up in Everett, we see tip sheets. Down in the south, in the Renton plant, we see quality alerts. But other than that, there's nothing that really tells our members when a BPI has changed. And when you look specifically at BPI 1581, since October of 2010, that BPI has changed 35 times. It went from 28 pages to 58 pages. And nobody really knows what those changes are.
What does the IAM tell its membership to do if it finds a issue with the BPI?
usually it's put in a speak up. That is one of our only avenues. You can take it to your manager, you can take it to the LSCC, but if you want to drive action, you can put it in either through a SAT or you can report it up through speak up, and then it will usually get addressed.
How does the IAM promote the criticality of manufacturing an aircraft to its membership?
Well, we do it through, number one, in our on our onboarding. We have our opportunity to meet with every new hire that's going to come into the IAM on day one. We have a conversation with them about that point, and then we hold our local lodge meetings. We have communications with them, but we don't have an arena where we are participating in Boeing training, where we are an active participant in any of these. Most of the training falls on the responsibility of the Boeing company through their quality manual.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cruz?
Can we just break for a second? So we are going to take a 10-minute break. 10 minutes, good? 10-minute break. We're going to break actually, I'll leave it to 11:05. A little more than 10 minutes. When we come back, we're going to come back to the technical panel. One thing I want everyone to do, see where my microphone is? Right in front of my mouth, right? Don't be afraid of it. Come right up to the microphone, and here's why. It's not just because we have people in the room, we've got fans back here, but people online, thank you, Gail, for emailing me, cannot hear. And so they are straining to hear. We are a very transparent agency. We want people to be able to follow along. And it's not just witnesses, but also the technical panel. And we're also straining up here. So right here is your microphone. Don't be afraid of it. Talk right in. Speak up. Okay? And then for the camera, there's a request to see name tags so people can see who's speaking if they're remote. So if we could back that up a little bit so that people can see name tags and follow along on who is speaking, both on the technical panel, the witness table, and amongst the parties. We want to make sure that everybody can participate whether they're here or not. So thank you. We will be back at 11:05.
Can you expand on the question?
Yeah, I mean, so during your findings in these audits, is there a reason or is there a tool communicated between Spirit and Boeing with regards to some of those audit findings?
Generally, we only refer those findings back to Boeing if there's been an escape of some kind through one of the suppliers. Otherwise, it's Spirit's oversight of the supplier. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Dr. Woods.
Thank you. Mr. Ackerman, I believe you're the only one who hasn't had an opportunity to tell us about your roles and responsibilities as the VP of Supplier Quality. Would you please do so now?
Thank you for the question. I did cover my roles and responsibilities, but just to reiterate, I do have responsibility for all of the parts, whether it's our external supply chain and overseeing the suppliers or our internal fabrication division.
Thank you for that. So for BCA, approximately how many suppliers does Boeing have?
It varies over time, but roughly speaking, we have about 1,200 active suppliers right now.
And similar to the questions that we presented to Spirit, about how many supplier quality auditors do you have within the organization?
I have about 200 auditors that are distributed around the world under an organization that I have that's supplier facing. I have a team that covers Europe. I have 2 different teams that cover North America, and I have a team that covers Asia and Southeast Asia.
And do these employees have any sort of specific training or certification that they need to be an auditor?
They do have training on their auditor function as supplier quality representatives, yes.
And for certification purposes, is there any sort of certification that they require?
I don't believe there are specific certifications with the exception of we have a group that oversees special processes, things like anodizing or non-destructive testing, and I believe they do have certifications.
And is the training a one-time thing or is there recurrent training?
There is both onboarding training and then there is recurring training.
Can you generally describe for us what type of audits Boeing conducts on its suppliers?
There's a variety of different audit tools we use. Typically, there's, or one common tool is a quality management system audit. It's in some ways similar to an audit to the AS9100 standard, but it's evaluating the internal procedures and policies of the supplier and their adherence to those policies. But we also have tools that are more part specific. So we'll do an audit of the production of an individual part at a supplier, or we'll do a manufacturing process audit where we take a type of manufacturing process and audit the production of multiple parts that go through that process.
And what sorts of timelines are you considering? Is it quarterly, yearly, monthly?
We do have, each supplier quality representative has a region, and they'll touch each one of those suppliers at least annually, but typically more than that. It is somewhat risk-based today, where we see a particular set of risks that would warrant more audits. As part of the comprehensive plan, we're moving to a more structured oversight where we have more forward-looking data that comes into our systems, an evaluation system, and then a more risk-based driven engagement with a supplier. And I should add, and then there are some suppliers where we have a full-time on-site presence, typically major structure suppliers. There are some other facilities where we do have full-time presence.
And how are the results of these audits communicated, and to whom are they communicated to throughout the Boeing company?
So the audits would, if there are any findings as a result of an audit, that would get documented and submitted to the supplier in the form of what we call a SIR, a supplier evaluation request. We log all of those SIRs, so we see internally in our data systems where we have repeat findings at a supplier or where we have an audit that would indicate a higher level of risk and indicate future action is needed.
So along that same vein, what controls are in place for your suppliers to ensure that they're adhering to Boeing's quality standards?
I would say that the primary control is those audits where we go out and do those evaluations at the supplier, but we also look at a broader data set for all of our suppliers. We look at defect rate. We look at, Scott described earlier, notice of escape. We look at notice of escape rates from suppliers. We look for trends in that data that would indicate additional oversight, responsibility, or escalation with a supplier is required.
Prior to the accident occurring, how often was Boeing auditing Spirit, for instance?
Spirit is one of the suppliers where we have a full-time on-site team. We have about 15 people, I believe, that are dedicated to an audit function. That was prior to both the accident and the manufacture of this fuselage. So it's roughly on a 2-week cycle.
And has that changed since the accident?
We have brought additional auditors in. We also support ongoing FAA audits at Spirit as well.
You said additional auditors, but has the rate of audits also increased?
I don't think the rate of audits has increased since the accident, no.
Prior to the accident occurring, high level, what sorts of issues were the auditors finding with their audits of Spirit?
The frequent types of audit findings we were identifying and writing up were things like control of FOD, foreign object debris, tool control, protection of parts, and compliance with manufacturing plans, where I'd say the most common. Or accessibility to manufacturing plans would be a better way to frame it.
And has the rate of supplier-generated defects changed over the last 5 years? And if so, how has it changed?
If you were to look at a 5-year window specific to the 737 fuselage or broader than that?
Specific to the 737.
We have seen ups and downs in the data. We saw some elevation going on in late 2022 going into 2023. And we started taking escalation steps as a result of that.
What do you mean by escalation steps?
We started with increasing the size of the team we had on site. It was in about May or June of 2023 that I put a senior director on site to have a supplier quality executive lead the team there. We started increasing the team, and then in May of 2023, we started introducing Boeing inspections where we would actually do inspections in the Spirit production system. We identified some specific areas based on a risk assessment that we did at the time. And we did that risk assessment concurrent with Spirit, particularly Spirit Engineering.
Thank you. Back to Spirit, Mr. George, can you please describe how your workforce demographic has changed over the last decade or so? And by demographic, I specifically mean experience, prior experience in manufacturing, skill, longevity with the company, that sort of thing.
Would characterize it 5 years ago, before 95% of the folks that we brought in had sheet metal experience in assembly. Now it's completely opposite. It's 5% of the folks that we bring in have sheet metal experience. Therefore, over that same time period, we've gone from a 2-week training to currently we have a 6 to 8 week training. Again, going through blueprint reading, work instructions, how to drill, how to install a fastener, sealant, those type of things.
What kind of assessments or safety risk assessments has Spirit done on how these changes in your workforce have affected quality control?
We are in the very beginning of our SMS journey, and I think that would capture it for the most part. Other than that, we haven't done much of a risk assessment relative to the tenure of our sheet metal mechanics.
Outside of extending the training by several weeks, have there been any other mitigations that Spirit has put in place to try to bridge that gap between experience and skill that you're seeing today?
Not specifically. Again, we try to launch countermeasures relative to things like bar charts, which is specific instructions, breaking the work down to the simplicity that we can, and then working with each of the mechanics and the line side teams, which we have that as well as Boeing, working with each of the teams to better understand their defects, root cause, and then corrective action plans associated.
Can I just add to that a little bit? One of the things that we have done is we've brought in what we call workplace coaches. These are generally retired mechanics who've done that type of work before. They don't want to come back as full time, but they will come back in. They will oversee some of the builds, some of the IPs that they were familiar with when they built the product.
Who is ultimately responsible for training Spirit personnel to work on Boeing products, both in Wichita and in Renton?
We have a core training group in Wichita that is responsible for training our personnel. And it would be for both the folks in Wichita and Renton.
Are any Spirit employees required to have certifications to perform work?
Yes. Again, we're kind of mainly talking about sheet metal mechanics and 737, but I have a whole fabrication division. We have inspection to where everything from non-destructive inspection, certification, and then to the higher levels of a mechanic relative to certifications for them.
Would you please give us an overview of what types of training are recurrent?
Oh, we have pretty much everything. So I'd start with we have an online training system. So periodically, every employee there's a term in there that they will train every 6 months, et cetera, depending on what the training is.
How often is your training audited to ensure that it's producing the results that you want?
Yeah, I think it would be more of an internal audit. I don't know that we have anything formal, but we obviously are in constant communication with our training leaders and the activity on the floor and how the latest group that just went through training, how they're performing, et cetera.
And then my last question on this subject is, do Spirit production personnel in Wichita require any sort of special training or certification to install a med plug?
No, not specifically.
Going back to Boeing, please. Ms. Lund, can you describe your workforce demographic? And again, to reiterate, by demographic, I mean experience, prior experience, and manufacturing skill, longevity with the company, that sort of thing, and how it has changed over the last decade.
Yes. Similar to Mr. George, prior to COVID, we had a experienced workforce, which we still do, but a more experienced workforce. And when we were hiring new employees, most of our new employees had some aerospace experience. We would hire them from the military. We would hire them from MROs, or even a technical school, but someone who had some training in the aerospace. Coming out of COVID, when we really started ramping up our hiring, we had quite a bit of attrition, though 2020, the year during COVID. When we came out of that and started ramping up our staffing, we found that considerably more of our employees did not have that aerospace experience or applicable experience in the job. And both the number of employees that we were hiring and the lack of experience, I would say, really started that demographic shift.
So what kind of change assessments were made considering that difference in what you had previously in terms of experience and skill and then what you have now?
We recognized by the end of 2022 and even had a risk assessment recognizing that we had an issue. And in 2023, we went back and tried to enhance our training program. We did enhance it. Our training program has two fundamental elements to it. The first is what we call our foundational training center. That's more what I'll call our classroom training, our initial training when you come into the company. And then there's an on-the-job training that you get when you're down on the floor. We enhanced our foundational training in 2023. We made improvements, but quite frankly, what we heard from our workforce loud and clear this year when we began our quality and safety stand downs is that we had more work to do. And since that time, starting with this year, we have made significant enhancements both to our foundational training as well as to our structured on-the-job training.
Are there any other controls or mitigations that you have put in place besides training to ensure the bridge between that experience and the current skill?
Yes. And so we'll start with training because that's important. In our foundational training, we have added over 300 hours of curriculum. We have gone back and really overhauled the curriculum. We've added significant elements on the safety management system, the importance of safety and being an aerospace mechanic. So we've started there. When it comes to on-the-job training, we've really moved to what we call now structured on-the-job training with several elements. We have an electronic dashboard. We track every employee. Every employee is assigned a peer mentor on the floor when they leave for structured on-the-job training. We no longer allow employees, mechanics or inspectors, to stamp jobs. We don't give them the authority in CMAS, as discussed earlier, to stamp jobs until they've successfully completed structured on-the-job training. That involves things like you have to have done the job you're going to be doing X number of times. On the 3-7, it's a minimum of 10 times for each job you're going to do with the peer mentor. You have to have done it with high quality. You have to have passed your compliance assessments showing that you can do these assessments. Your peer mentor has to buy off that you're ready. There's a self-assessment that now an employee has to say, yes, I'm comfortable, and a manager has to buy that off. So it's very structured. You don't get the ability to stamp until you pass through that. And then we've come back and also added workplace coaches. Since the time of the accident, we've hired 160 additional workplace coaches. We now have over 250 across our programs. They're on the floor. They're there on all shifts. They're available for any employee at any time to say, I have a question. Could someone come assist me? We have a broad array of skills and experience so that they can help with many different functions out there on the floor. And lastly, what I will say is, as a part of this, knowing that we needed to do more to our training, we went back to every mechanic who'd been there a year or less and every inspector who'd been there 2 years or less and did some basic assessments, ensuring they had the skills as well. It wasn't an ongoing gap. And if they struggled through those assessments, we provided more training, and we now are 100% through those assessments with those employees. And so we took steps there as well.
Apologies. Can I just ask for the Board of Inquiry, is that now after the accident you've done all of that or before?
The last part that I just talked about is since the accident, and it's part of our improvement plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How is the training documented and archived for personnel?
The exact system it's housed in, I can't speak to, but what I can speak to is we do have required training. We have safety required training, both personal and product safety required training. And we do keep those records. We have required learning. We have a system that comes to each one of us called My Learning. There's required learning. You go in and do it. If you're doing it in a group setting, someone goes in and records your taking of that class. So those records are there, and we can ensure that all employees have received all the required training.
And to be clear, is this in as of last year, or when did this start taking place?
This has been a long time system. I don't have the exact date, but for many, many years, as long as I can remember, Doug.
Can you speak to the differences in training for inspectors and quality personnel?
Yes. When mechanics come in, everyone goes through sort of a foundational training where to ensure they know how to read a drawing, they know how to access the systems, this kind of a thing. For mechanics at that point, they peel off so that it's really more about their job function that they've hired into. For inspectors, we have a higher level of training for things like our process inspections, our instructions, our BPIs. It's important to us that the inspectors have that higher level of familiarity with all of our BPIs, our requirements that they can pull product data. We call that pulling the drawings, the specifications, et cetera, that they have more familiarity with those kinds of activities, and our training is set up around that. We also have some additional specific training. Inspectors are the people who write rejection tags. We work with them on that. We have a training element for how you correctly identify the location. We call it a 3-point location on an airplane. How you identify a 3-point location on an airplane. Things like that are included in a quality inspector training.
Do you have any sort of metric that tracks the effectiveness of Boeing's training program?
We've been really working since the accident, for the sake of clarity, to make sure that we have a closed loop system. So we now are tracking feedback from the peer mentors and the employees when they come out. We track the employees' self-assessments. We ask them how they're feeling, and then we track the quality of the work that these employees do also. We track the compliance activities. We have, by compliance activities, I mean things like maintaining your tool control, storing work in process parts appropriately, checking your area for FOD, ensuring that the area is per process. So we're checking those records as well, and we're feeding that all back into our training process, as well as certification issues or failures. If we see employees who are taking the test to get their certifications not passing, we're now feeding that back into training so we can strengthen that training as well.
So to be clear, these were things that were not in place prior to January of this year.
We would more informally track it prior to this year. We would get feedback from the floor. That's how we knew we needed to improve prior, but it wasn't the formally documented closed loop process that we've put in place since the accident.
Has Boeing ever sought external audits and validation of their training program?
I am not aware that we have sought an external audit for our training program. We have external trainers who come in some locations, but I'm not aware of the audit process there.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Next group of questions is for Spirit AeroSystems. Prior to the accident, what type of final inspection was accomplished at Spirit before the fuselage was shipped to ensure the product Spirit was producing was delivered to Boeing and it conformed to the highest standard?
So throughout the build process, Spirit performs several different kinds of inspections. So for each IP that we spoke of earlier, the build production paperwork, there's in-process inspections that occur along the way. What that means is in order to proceed through the build, certain items may need to be inspected and recorded. So for instance, hole diameters, verify the shim gaps, those types of things. Upon the completion of each one of the jobs, then there's a final inspection that's performed by a Spirit inspector, validating that the job has been completed, all the in-processes are completed as well to satisfy the engineering requirements. Upon completion of all the IPs that make up the fuselage, at the very end of the line, there is we'll do a final FOD walk. Boeing actually participates in the final FOD walk prior to our implementation of final product verification. So Boeing and Spirit, first Spirit goes onto the aircraft, validates that there's no FOD, then the Boeing team comes in after that. They do a FOD sweep as well. Once that's completed and everybody is satisfied, then the fuselage is shipped to Boeing.
And that was before September of 23?
Correct.
Has the process changed since the accident, and if so, how?
Yes, the process has changed in that now there's an additional process called final product verification. So everything I just spoke up to this point remains the same with the exception of the Boeing FOD walk at the very end of our assembly. What you saw in the video is the units go from the end of the line onto a rail car and up to Renton. Now the procedure is once Spirit finalizes the build and final inspections of the aircraft, the aircraft then goes through what we call final product verification. Final product verification, we basically take that completed fuselage. It is inspected by the Boeing team and the Spirit team. Defects, anything that was not found in the initial manufacturing and inspection, Boeing and Spirit will record. Spirit records the defect, reworks the defect. Boeing then goes and buys back, ensuring that the defects have been reworked to standard, and then the unit is shipped.
In general, what changes to the processes or policies have been implemented since the accident at Spirit?
So several things have been implemented. The final product verification is probably the biggest change. In addition, there's also in-process inspections that have been added. So for instance, currently I believe the number is 50 Boeing in-process validations. What that means is Boeing has identified 50 places throughout the build of the fuselage that they would like to perform an inspection on after Spirit inspects. So for instance, the first 5 steps of a procedure, Spirit will validate that the work is done properly. Boeing then will perform an inspection, and they will also sign off on our system, allowing it to move forward.
Okay, Ms. Lund, what type of receiving inspection is accomplished on a fuselage once it arrives at Renton? This is September 23, remember?
Yes. In the time frame of September 23, when a fuselage arrived at Boeing, either on flow day 1 or what we sometimes refer to as flow day 0, which is a informal position. Really, it just meant let's pull it early and look. We did a inspection of the fuselage to look for defects that had come up before in our production system. It primarily related to things like skin quality. We would check to make sure that the skin was flat, that it was conforming. We would check the fasteners to make sure that they were per specification throughout the airplane. We would check for FOD, as was mentioned, to make sure that the airplane is clean. And so at the beginning of our flow day, we did a relatively comprehensive inspection of issues we had seen in our production system before so that we could have those documented on pickups or rejection tags at the beginning of the flow and know what they were when we started our build process.
Okay, so back in September, if there was a discrepancy, how was Spirit notified?
Spirit has a team that works in our factory along with us. A resident team, as was mentioned, and led by some Spirit management and Spirit direct or contract employees. So when Boeing would write these discrepancies, we would then pass them along to Spirit. The pickups, most were on pickups, a few were on rejection tags if something were found that needed to be. Most were on a pickup document. We would pass those findings along to Spirit and then begin the work with Spirit to arrange times to make sure that we had them rectified.
And just to add for clarity, if there was a discrepancy found, it was and is documented as a nonconformance in Boeing's system.
Mm-hmm. Yes, on the pickup, the NCR pickup that we discussed in our system.
And is that communicated back to Spirit Wichita?
Yes, it is. At the time, September 23rd, September of 2023, we had several elements going. We actually had at that time what we called a daily grinder, just what we called the daily meeting. But every day we would have a call with Boeing Wichita and our production team on the 737 program informing Boeing Wichita of the issues we had seen that day so that we could quickly get it back into Spirit's process and ensure they were aware of the findings we had every day.
So let's fast forward to current. What steps have you taken to ensure that discrepancies from Spirit are identified and corrected prior to fuselages moving to Boeing?
I'll take that one.
Okay, great.
As Mr. Graybon indicated, one of the changes we added to the process, effective March 1st, every fuselage goes through what we call final product verification, which is a dedicated area in Spirit's factory where we have Boeing inspectors typically spend a couple of days going over that fuselage front to back, outside and inside, to identify any discrepancies. Those are documented in Spirit's system, reworked by Spirit, and bought back by Boeing inspectors. Just to add a little context to that, as Mr. Graybon described earlier, the delivery of that fuselage from Spirit to Boeing occurs in Wichita. So we actually take ownership of that fuselage when it's on the rail car exiting Spirit's factory. So we want to have that acceptance verification at the location where it's manufactured.
What changes to the process or policies have been implemented since the accident at Boeing? I know it's a broad question. I'm looking for improvement. So
Broadly, yes. So broadly, when we started to implement our changes and post accident, we set about casting a wide net to get feedback from many sources. I briefly referred to it earlier, but we implemented what we called quality stand downs. We had over 70,000 BCA employees go through this quality stand down. This quality stand down was an 8-hour full shift day and a meeting where we started off with a kickoff, but we then took all cross-functional teams. This was engineering, manufacturing, quality, supply chain professionals, finance, HR, everyone, to the airplane to work in cross-functional teams. We taught everyone on the manufacturing floor how we do a compliance walk and a safety walk. We then provided these teams, just for helping and understanding, I'll use an example of a landing gear team. The people who buy the landing gear, design the landing gear, purchase the landing gear, install the landing gear, service the landing gear. All of them came together. We provided them with all of the defects that have been created in their area recently and had that team work on suggestions of how we can improve quality or product safety. We took all of that feedback. We had over 30,000 suggestions come through that activity. We also took all of the feedback from the FAA in the audits that they had come into our factories and conducted. We took feedback from our customers. We took it broadly from a very broad group of people. And then we looked at these areas, and in very broad levels, we made changes in 4 key areas. The first is investing in our training. I talked about some of that earlier in how we've changed our training. We held people in training. We've revamped our curriculum, our closed loop system. And so really significant changes to training that are continuing and ongoing. The next is we've started a process really working on simplification. Simplification of our processes and procedures, as was recommended to us by the FAA, as well as our own employees. During our audit out brief, the FAA conducted what they call a special audit item, an SAI. That's the name of the audit they conducted. And as part of the out brief, they recommended a simplification of our processes and procedures. We are undertaking that. And we are also working on simplifying our installation plans, making sure that they are simple and clear and easy for our mechanics and our inspectors to read and access. We then really worked on eliminating defects in a couple of key areas. First and foremost is our supply chain, strengthening our oversight of supply chain, with a large part of this being the examples that we just gave for things like Spirit. And then also strengthening our compliance systems, our own compliance, particularly as led by areas where we'd had recurrent auditing findings, internal and external, and that we knew needed to be enhanced. And then lastly is really elevating our safety and quality culture. We took the feedback from the AXA 103 legislation. We have started employee engagement teams, which we have set aside an hour a week for our teams on the floor with cross-functional help to raise their issues, make sure they're getting help with their issues and that they can work their own issues. As a part of this, we are also working on how we better manage traveled work. So all of those have begun to be implemented and are in various stages of that.
What specific changes have been made to BPI 1581 to simplify it?
I will give you a high-level overview. I will also say on tomorrow's panel, my colleague, Mr. Hector Silva, will be on the panel representing the quality management system, and he will be able to speak in even more detail to this if you would like to revisit it tomorrow. But at a high level on BPI 1581, since the accident, we've made a few key changes. We initially went and said, to start with, only leads or team leads would be able to initiate a removal. We have since said, and we said at the time, there's a training program that we put in place. Now, any employee who passes the training or assessment program of how BPI 1581 works and shows they have a competence and a knowledge, a working knowledge of this BPI, can now initiate the removal. So the first change was the very first change was we put out what we called a read and sign, a summary of the requirements of the BPI to every employee working in the factory floor, mechanic and inspector, having them reread the requirements of the BPI and sign that they understood it. We then strengthened the requirements of who could write the BPI. We did that so that we could just say to people, you're going to need to go get your lead or a trained person to write this for you, so that they would reach out, go get someone with that qualification to write the BPI. And then most recently, we have also added a quality check that says you are okay to remove, okay to proceed with the removal. You get someone who's qualified, they write the removal, and then a quality employee then looks over it and says, yep, you're good, you're okay to proceed with the removal. So we have added those additional steps in the BPI since the accident.
Thank you. Mr. Catlin, do you believe that the efforts to change BPI are enough?
Well, I would like to point out that in September of 2016, the quality okay to remove was part of the removal process. And in September of 2016, the Boeing company removed it from the process, and now they've added it back in. BPI 1581, as I said, has grown from It has doubled in size from 28 pages to 58 pages. The majority of the changes to BPI 1581 was to add a complex removal scenario where manufacturing engineering could be invoked to write a removal with step-by-step reinstallation processes, which very rarely ever gets used. But the bulk of the changes that has grown 1581 have been reasons why not to write a removal. There's an entire exhibit in the back of the BPI that gives you tons of reasons why you would not need to write a removal. And it really should get back to the simplicity of if it's a previously installed part and you're going to remove it from a commercial airplane, you need to write a removal.
Thank you. Dr. Woods?
If I may, could I just comment? I want to make sure that I did not leave the impression that we are done simplifying BPI 1581. I agree with Mr. Catlin that we do need further simplification of that BPI. And so I want to comment that that is part of our ongoing work. It is by no means, in our opinion either, simple enough or sufficient.
Thank you. Dr. Woods?
Ms. Lund, you've touched on in the past Boeing's comprehensive product safety and quality plan going forward, and you've also touched on briefly the 6 key performance indicators or target areas in which Boeing is now focusing on going forward. Given the FAA inspections, given your internal audits that have been conducted on your production system, what prevented these same targets from being identified before the accident occurred?
Those 6 key performance indicators, and I don't know if it would help. I do have an exhibit listing them, if that would help for the sake of this conversation, perhaps. That is exhibit 6, please. Boeing exhibit 6.
Just a point of clarification, that's in Boeing
Yes.
Boeing's presentation.
Boeing presentation, thank you.
Not Exhibit 6
Sorry.
to the public hearing. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Page 6 of the Boeing presentation. I appreciate the help with the language. Okay. The 6 key performance indicators that we have agreed with the FAA that we will use to watch production health, the number of proficient employees. This will help me answer your specific question, Dr. Woods, very clearly. Number of proficient employees. We, as I mentioned previously, have always looked at staffing as a requirement when we go up in rate. This is similar to staffing, except to say, have they passed all proficiency requirements? So have they completed their new structured on-the-job training, et cetera? So do you have enough of the employees that you need in order to work at the rate? The arrow just basically shows the direction we would like it to go. We would like more proficient employees. The next is supplier shortages. We have always used supplier shortages as an indication of the health of our production system. We think this is representative. It causes disruption in the production system when we have a supplier shortage. So that is the one that we agreed with. The next 2 are really quality related. The first is notice of escapement rework hours. That is rework hours being done in the Boeing production system, typically final assembly, as a result of a notice of escapement. That's an escape that comes from a supplier, either a fabrication internal supplier or an external supplier. And so that just tells us how much rework are we having to do for notice of escapements into the factory. The next is a total quality measure. How many total rework hours per airplane? We have also looked at this historically. What we have done, what's really new here is setting the control limits, rolling that into our safety management system to understand when we need mitigation activity, when the risk has exceeded. And as we pass one of these control limits, we pass the red control limit, we now run a safety risk assessment and put documented mitigated plans in place. That's really the change, not the metric itself, but the agreement of the control limits and the targets and the action we take. Next is travelers at factory rollout. That is, did we get the majority of the work within our control limit completed in the factory? And then lastly is really our output metric at the end of the line. How many defects do we find at the time of ticketing? And with the 737, this is defects found by the FAA at the time of their ticketing activity. So what I will say is these metrics have been in place with small changes to them over time. What has really changed is the control limits, how we work through our safety management system when we pass one of those control limits, as well as the fact that the FAA now has transparent visibility, real-time visibility into our system where they can watch these metrics. They update on a daily basis, where they could watch these metrics real-time across our programs. So those are the real changes. It's the agreement of just these 6 and the control limits and how we work with them in our safety management system.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Brazy, the tech panel concludes its questions.
Thank you, Dr. Woods. Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to the parties. I just want a word of caution here. This isn't a PR campaign for Boeing. What we want to know is what happened in March, April, May, June, July, August, September, leading up to this, leading up to what happened in January. You can talk all about where you are today. There's going to be plenty of time for that. We want to know these safety improvements. But what is very confusing for a lot of people who are watching, who are listening, is what was going on then. This is an investigation on what happened on January 5th. Understand for everybody? Great. We're going to move to the parties. And we are going to start with questions from the Airline Pilots Association. Each party will have 5 minutes to question the witnesses. We'll have multiple rounds as time permits. Parties, please remember you must limit your questions to the topics listed in the agenda. Please also refrain from asking questions that call for speculation. Finally, remember that only your designated spokesperson may question the witnesses. I'll now turn the floor over to Alpa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our question is for Ms. Lund. Earlier, the Boeing Speak Up program was mentioned. 2 fully trained and qualified pilots and in-flight crew flew this crippled airplane to a successful landing. They filed voluntary ASAP reports, which stands for Aviation Safety Action Program. ASAP reports are confidential and de-identified and generates improvement in safety in the operation. Is Speak Up similar, and how is it implemented and governed?
Speak Up is similar to the ASAP process. Speak Up is a confidential system. It is when you log into the Speak Up system within the Boeing system, there is an option to submit anonymously, and it is always confidential. The way it's administered when the employee writes the Speak Up, it is assigned to really a function or a program, a part of the organization who will handle it. They do come across confidentially. I will say I personally read all of them for the safety organization, and I have no access to the employee's name who submits them. The investigative team themselves, if they're confidential and came in with a name, would be the team who has access to that so they could go discuss it with the employee. And we track it in our safety management system reviews. We track the completion, the actions. We do it by function, by billboard, and then at program levels. The one other comment I will make related to ASAP, as I understand it, is the elements of ASAP where the unions and the companies and things work together is the element that we were working on when we formed our tri-party agreement last year with the FAA and the IAM to ensure that we were trying to find similarities to that same process of the ASAP with the union representation in the loop as well as the FAA.
Thank you. Prior to COVID, manufacturers allowed airline quality control inspectors to observe the build process. Airlines had inspectors stationed in the factories. Has that process been brought back to the quality assurance of the build after COVID? I believe this is both for Boeing and Spirit.
Yes, and we can both take it. I will start by saying we do have airline inspectors in our factory and at our flight line. We actually did have it pre-COVID. We have it today. We have quite a few customers. We have customer inspections throughout our build process where the customers can come and inspect or say good to go themselves, or they can delegate that to the Boeing quality organization. But it is currently in process.
Okay, thank you. It's been described during interviews with employees and FAA inspectors that experience levels at Spirit have decreased over the last 5 years. How is Spirit addressing on-the-job training for technicians when the majority of the experienced technicians have left or retired?
I mentioned that earlier, that we've expanded this to 6 to 8 week training. We are going to do an additional step. Elizabeth had mentioned similar to this. So another 2 weeks of specific OJT into the area that they're going to go into, so that they could be more aware of the requirements, the airplane and the requirement, their future work.
Follow-up question to that. What training records show standardization or proficiency from that on-the-job training you described?
I'm not familiar with all of the details through the training group, but I'm sure that it's collected, but I'm just not familiar with it.
Thank you. My follow-ups to the IAM. What changes to technician training have been implemented from an IAM viewpoint to mitigate this risk?
Well, we've never been impressed with Boeing's training at all. Since somewhere around 2008, prior to 2008, there was pre-employment training that was required. Then there was extensive skills process center training that was required. Now that's all changed. Prior to the January 5th door plug blowout, Boeing's training at their foundational training center was in really bad shape. There has been changes, but I don't know that it's enough.
Thank you. And my last question to Ms. Lund. All the extra on-the-floor training experience discussed earlier sounds pretty positive. IAM discussed the degradation of BPI training from formal training to bulletins and now tips. How will Boeing prevent a reduction in these after-accident improvements?
Thank you. Sustaining these gains is super important to us. We are documenting much of this in command media to ensure that it is formalized. We are auditing against these improvements with our internal audit team as we make them. First and foremost, we're making the commitments to ourselves and then to the FAA. So we're auditing against them to make sure that they maintain. We are watching the metrics. That's why we're working on these closed loop feedback loops. And ultimately, we will use our SMS process and our SMS architecture, that as we change our processes, we will evaluate the risks from changing those processes. We will run SRMs and SRAs so that we have clear visibility of the risks occurring as we make changes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to go with Alaska Airlines.
Thank you, ma'am. As far as this first panel on the overview of the manufacturing, we did have a series of questions. The technical panel did a very good job of clarifying the things that were on our minds, so no further questions.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll go with the Association of Flight Attendants.
Thank you. This question is for Boeing. All 737 exit doors, including mid-exit doors, have a door proximity switch that illuminates an indicator light in the flight deck when a door moves even slightly out of its lock position. However, Exhibit 9A indicates this warning system appears to be partially installed, but not used on the 737 MAX 9 mid-exit door when a door plug is installed. While door plugs are not opened during daily operations, they will be opened many times for maintenance over the fleet's lifetime, introducing the possibility of an insecure closure. An operative door proximity switch could provide an additional layer of safety by alerting the pilots to any door plug movement, resulting in subsequent maintenance action. The structure group chair's factual report documents that door plug separation on Flight 1282 occurred at only 16,000 feet, where the pressure differential between the inside and the outside of the aircraft was slightly lower than it would have been at cruise altitude. While the aircraft is certified to withstand a sudden decompression at any flight altitude caused by a hole slightly larger than an aircraft window, the hole created by the departure of the door plug was more than twice that size. A door plug failure must be extremely improbable, which the FAA defines as a condition so unlikely that it is not anticipated to occur during the entire operational life of all airplanes of one type, with a probability of less than 1 in a billion. Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 suffered door plug separation just 73 days after aircraft N704AL was manufactured. Is the system also excluded on the 737-900 ERs and with door plugs? And considering the potential catastrophic structural failure that could result from a door plug separation at cruise altitude, why was the decision made to exclude this and any other warning system on mid-door plugs?
With the caveat of not being a door design expert, I will tell you to the best of my understanding where we are. So you are correct. We have a door warning sensor and light on doors that notifies in case of that it's movement or not fully closed. It was not included